long before hospitals, doctors, or modern medicine, women brought life into the world on nothing but courage, centuries-old knowledge, and sheer endurance. Imagine giving birth in a candlelit room, surrounded by whispers, herbs, and the ever-present shadow of danger. What it truly took to survive childbirth in medieval times will shock you, and reveal a story of human resilience that has been almost forgotten. In a time long before the advent of modern medicine, childbirth was both a profound miracle and a dangerous undertaking, a delicate interplay between human endurance, careful observation, and the skill passed down through generations. Imagine a quiet room, softly illuminated by the flicker of candles, their gentle light casting warm shadows across stone walls. The faint aroma of herbs, lavender to soothe the mind, rosemary to strengthen the body, and chamomile to ease pain, hung in the air, mingling with the anticipation and anxiety that filled the space. Mothers, clothed in simple yet comforting garments, prepared for labor with a mixture of reverence, fear, and quiet determination. Around them stood women whose hands carried decades of experience, midwives whose knowledge had been cultivated through countless births, each shaped by lessons learned through trial, error, and observation. Pregnancy itself was not taken lightly. Every stage was approached with meticulous care. Diets were closely monitored, avoiding foods believed to provoke harm or imbalance in the body, while herbal remedies were employed to ease discomfort, stimulate appetite, or prepare the womb for delivery. Daily routines were carefully managed, excessive physical labor was minimized, yet gentle movement and stretching were encouraged to maintain strength. Household chores were reassigned, firewood was gathered ahead of time, water drawn, and the room prepared with warmth and comfort in mind. Spiritual rituals accompanied these preparations, whispered prayers, small charms, and blessings to invoke divine protection, reinforcing the understanding that life, both incoming and nurturing, depended on more than mere human effort. Every action, however minor, carried weight. Adjusting a pillow, arranging a blanket, stirring a mild herbal infusion, all were intentional, part of a broader choreography designed to ensure the safety and endurance of mother and child alike. As labor approached, the atmosphere shifted subtly. The first contractions arrived quietly, almost imperceptibly, like a distant drum signaling the start of an arduous journey. These initial waves were a signal that the body was preparing, muscles tightening, the cervix softening, the womb contracting with purpose. The mother, guided by intuition and experience, attuned herself to each sensation, noting the timing, intensity, and rhythm. Midwives watched closely, their eyes trained to recognize subtle signs that could indicate progress, or the need for intervention. They observed the mother's skin tone, her breathing, her pulse, and the faint movements of the child within. Female relatives, often mothers, sisters, or aunts, often their presence, holding hands, whispering comforting words, and maintaining warmth. Every element, light, scent, touch, and sound, was arranged to provide both physical comfort and emotional reassurance. The environment was carefully orchestrated, a blend of practical and spiritual support, designed to carry the mother safely through one of life's most profound challenges. The hours of labor stretched with slow intensity. Contractions grew stronger, each wave demanding endurance, attention, and deliberate breathing. The mother's focus narrowed to her own body, her own rhythm, while the midwives guided her gently, adjusting positions, applying herbal compresses to soothe tension, and offering encouragement. Pain was relentless, yet it was met not with fear but with calm acknowledgement. Every breath, every contraction, every subtle movement carried purpose. The midwife's hands moved with precise intent, checking the progress of the labor, massaging to relieve tension, and ensuring that the mother's energy was preserved. In those long hours, the household itself became a quiet ecosystem, where every gesture, every word, every careful observation contributed to survival. There was no rush, only a patient, measured approach that recognized both the fragility and the resilience inherent in childbirth. Complications were never far from the mind. Labor could stall. The child might be positioned improperly, or excessive bleeding could occur. Infection, poorly understood, could threaten both mother and child. Midwives relied on keen observation, intuition, and experience to guide interventions, sometimes applying herbal remedies to stimulate contraction, encourage relaxation, or counter excessive bleeding. Stillbirths were a tragic reality, met with sorrow and quiet mourning. Families grieved privately, understanding that death was intertwined with life, yet they persisted in their care and rituals. Prayer, charms, and blessings provided solace when human ability fell short, framing the ordeal within a context of faith and hope. Awareness of mortality sharpened attentiveness, creating a heightened sense of responsibility and care in every action performed within the birthing space. When the child finally arrived, the focus shifted immediately to survival. Midwives guided the mother in breastfeeding, ensuring the infant received nourishment and warmth. Swaddling, practiced with meticulous care, involved folding blankets snugly yet gently, offering security without restriction. Every touch, every movement, every soft word carried significance. In wealthier households, wet nurses might be employed, yet more often, it was the mother herself who became the source of sustenance, comfort, and protection. Spiritual practices remained integral. Baptism or blessings were performed if the infant seemed fragile, integrating both physical survival and divine safeguarding into the first hours of life. The household's attention, minute and deliberate, became the lifeline for this new being, weaving together practical care, emotional support, and spiritual reassurance into a single, continuous thread of survival. Postpartum recovery for the mother was painstakingly slow. Cramping, fatigue, and emotional strain persisted for weeks, requiring rest, nourishment, and warmth. Household routines adjusted to ensure that the mother could focus on recovery, while tending to the needs of the infant. Breastfeeding reinforced both maternal and infant health, providing nourishment and a bond that was essential to survival. Midwives continued to guide, offering advice on positioning, massage, and herbal remedies to alleviate pain and strengthen recovery. Each small repeated act, holding the infant, adjusting a blanket, monitoring for signs of distress, was a deliberate measure to maintain life and promote health. The rhythm of these actions became habitual, embedding a structured system of care that relied on patience, observation, and endurance. Community support played a crucial role. Fertility was celebrated, and the endurance of mothers was recognized and respected. Midwives held authority in the birthing environment, guiding decisions and instructing the household in practical care. In noble households, the stakes of survival were magnified, influencing political alliances, inheritance, and family continuity. In peasant homes, the focus remained on survival, continuity, and labor participation. Across both contexts, childbirth was simultaneously an intimate, personal experience and a socially significant event, blending endurance, communal support, and the subtle exercise of authority and knowledge. Rituals, prayers, charms, and blessings, intertwined with daily practical care, reinforcing the spiritual dimension of survival alongside the physical. Observation and attentiveness became central themes. Every gesture, swaddling, breastfeeding, adjusting warmth, monitoring color and breathing, was imbued with significance. Knowledge, accumulated over generations, guided the hands of midwives and mothers alike. Life persisted through meticulous attention, careful monitoring, and the subtle application of experience and intuition. Even in modest homes, these practices created a framework of survival. A living legacy of human wisdom that shaped every generation's approach to birth and nurturing. The continuous attention of those around the mother and child formed the protective scaffolding that allowed life to endure. Despite uncertainty and danger, weeks turned into months, and the early fragility of life shifted into careful nurturing. Infants were observed continuously, monitored for signs of hunger, discomfort, or illness. Baths, massages, and gentle exercises were sometimes applied to strengthen the child. Mothers regained strength gradually, supported by family neighbors and midwives. The household adapted to accommodate these new rhythms, balancing the care of the infant, the mother, and the broader demands of daily life. Every minor adjustment, altering a blanket, adjusting temperature, offering nourishment, contributed to a broader structure of attentiveness and care that extended beyond immediate survival to the ongoing cultivation of health and resilience. Even in noble households, where the birth of an heir carried immense social and political significance, the principles of care remained constant. Ceremonies and rituals emphasized divine protection and continuity, yet practical, attentive care underpinned every act. Endurance, patient observation, and careful attention to detail ensured both mother and child survived the first fragile days. Across households of all classes, the principles of survival, patience, observation, vigilance, and gentle intervention remained universal, shaping human life in profound and enduring ways. The days following childbirth were a delicate balance of vigilance, rest, and careful nurturing, as the mother's body slowly regained strength and the infant adjusted to life outside the womb. Every movement, every sigh, every subtle change in color or breathing became significant, observed keenly by midwives, mothers, and other experienced women in the household. The infant's cries, initially a source of urgent attention, were interpreted with careful observation, each pitch, duration, and intensity signaling a specific need: hunger, discomfort, or the need for warmth. Mothers learned to read these signs instinctively, their connection to their child deepened by countless hours of observation and responsive care. Swaddling remained a vital practice, not merely for comfort but for the survival of fragile life. Blankets were folded meticulously, snug yet gentle, allowing movement while offering security. The swaddling process was accompanied by subtle rituals, whispered blessings, gentle rocking, and careful adjustment to maintain warmth without causing restriction. Midwives instructed mothers on these techniques, emphasizing the importance of tactile awareness, patience, and steady hands. Each touch, each fold of the cloth, carried significance, shaping the child's early sense of security and aiding in physiological stability. These practices, repeated across generations, became traditions deeply embedded in the rhythm of daily life. Feeding was another domain requiring constant attention. Breastfeeding was not merely a source of nourishment, but a cornerstone of infant survival, bonding, and maternal recovery. Mothers were guided to maintain consistent feeding schedules, observing signs of hunger and satiety, and adjusting positioning to ensure comfort and efficacy. In cases where mothers were unable to provide milk, wet nurses were employed, selected careful for their health, temperament, and experience. Even in such arrangements, midwives maintained oversight, instructing caregivers in techniques of feeding, soothing, and monitoring, ensuring continuity of care. These practices reflected a deep understanding of human physiology, emotional needs, and the delicate balance between life, growth, and survival. The mother's recovery was equally rigorous and deliberate. Pain, cramping, and lingering fatigue demanded careful attention, rest, and nourishment. Herbal remedies, infusions, compresses, and ointments, were applied to aid healing, regulate bodily functions, and soothe discomfort. Midwives taught mothers gentle exercises to restore strength, emphasizing the importance of patience, consistency, and attentive observation. Every day was a careful negotiation between activity and rest, sustenance and exertion, ensuring that the mother regained health gradually, while maintaining the demands of caring for her newborn. The household adapted to these rhythms, redistributing labor, adjusting routines, and providing constant support. Social and community structures influenced care and survival profoundly. In rural communities, neighbors and relatives often contributed hands-on support, offering meals, assistance with chores, and emotional comfort. These communal practices were not merely practical, they reinforced bonds of trust, empathy, and shared responsibility. In noble households, support was more structured and ceremonial, with attendants, midwives, and advisors ensuring both mother and infant were meticulously cared for. The survival of heirs carried political and social weight, intertwining birth with dynastic considerations. Regardless of status, the principles remained consistent: patient observation, endurance, and attentive care underpinned survival, with rituals, prayers, and ceremonies reinforcing spiritual and emotional resilience. Daily life during this period was a careful choreography of observation, patience, and repeated care. Every movement, from adjusting a blanket to monitoring the infant's breathing, was an act of vigilance. Midwives taught mothers to recognize subtle changes. From a slight discoloration to a faint irregular breath, each sign potentially signaling illness or distress. Observation extended beyond the physical. Attention to the infant's emotional cues, vocalizations, and reactions was essential for fostering attachment, security, and calm. Through repetition, these practices became ingrained, creating an intuitive framework for survival that guided generations of mothers and children alike. Rituals and ceremonies complemented practical care, blending spiritual awareness with everyday attention. Baptism, naming, prayers, and small blessings were integrated into daily routines, providing both protection and comfort. Candles were lit, herbs burned, and charms placed strategically, weaving a tapestry of symbolic and practical care. Even in modest households, these practices emphasized the connection between the physical and the spiritual, creating a protective environment in which both mother and child could thrive. The combination of ritual, attentive observation, and patient endurance formed the backbone of survival, demonstrating the interdependence of mind, body, and spirit in early human life. Over weeks and months, the infant gradually stabilized, and the mother regained strength. Feeding, bathing, and gentle massage became part of a structured routine that reinforced growth, health, and attachment. Midwives continued to provide guidance, adapting practices as the child developed, addressing any signs of illness or discomfort, and ensuring continuity of care. Household members observed and participated, learning the skills of attentive observation, gentle intervention, and patient nurturing. These practices, repeated across time and space, embedded the principles of survival, care, and resilience into the very fabric of community life. As the child matured, the lessons of early care extended into ongoing nurturing and health maintenance. Observation remained central, tracking appetite, sleep patterns, movement, and response to the environment. Illnesses were addressed with herbal remedies, warmth, and close monitoring. Mothers and caregivers were trained to recognize early signs of distress, providing immediate intervention where possible. The repetition of these practices ensured that fragile life could be protected, nurtured, and guided toward resilience. These routines also reinforced the intergenerational transmission of knowledge, as older women taught younger mothers the intricacies of attentive care, ritual, and practical skill. Even in households of high status, where births were heavily monitored for dynastic and political significance, the principles of patient, attentive care were consistent. Ceremonies, rituals, and formal oversight augmented practical measures, but the core remained unchanged: observation, vigilance, and careful management of both mother and infant. The stakes were higher, the rituals more elaborate, but survival depended on the same fundamental practices that governed births in modest homes. Across centuries and social strata, these shared principles underpinned human continuity, linking generations through common knowledge, practice, and understanding. The endurance required in these early months shaped both physical and emotional development. Mothers faced lingering pain and fatigue, while attending to the constant demands of feeding, bathing, and monitoring. Infants relied entirely on attentive care for warmth, nourishment, and security. The household, as a living system, adjusted constantly, balancing chores, nurturing and vigilance. Each small gesture, from adjusting a blanket to interpreting subtle vocal cues, carried weight. Repetition of these acts built habits of care, embedding knowledge and experience into everyday practice. Endurance, patience, and attentive observation became inseparable from survival, shaping early human life in profound ways. Through each stage, from pregnancy to labor, from birth to early infancy, the patterns of attentive care, spiritual practice, and social support reinforced human resilience. Mothers endured immense physical strain, midwives provided skillful guidance, and families adapted to fragile rhythms of life. Survival was ensured not only by observation and intervention, but by the persistent application of small, repeated acts of care. Knowledge passed slowly, quietly, from one generation to the next, embedding principles of endurance, patience, and attentiveness into human culture. Even as centuries passed, the core lessons of medieval childbirth, careful observation, consistent support, and the integration of physical and spiritual practices, remained timeless. Daily life became a continuous rhythm of attention, care and adaptation. Feeding, swaddling, bathing, monitoring, and gentle interaction shaped the infant's growth and development. Mothers regained strength, yet were never entirely free from the vigilance that early infancy required. Every sound, movement, and expression was interpreted for signs of need or distress. Midwives' knowledge, accumulated through decades, guided these observations and interventions, ensuring that subtle cues were not overlooked. In this meticulous attention to detail, life persisted, strengthened by human ingenuity, experience, and enduring care. Even the smallest acts carried profound significance. Adjusting a blanket, offering nourishment, monitoring breathing, or providing reassurance could determine life or death. These repeated, deliberate gestures formed a protective framework around fragile human life, embedding practices of survival into the rhythm of daily existence. Observation, patience, and calm presence were inseparable from nurturing, creating continuity that extended beyond immediate survival to the formation of healthy, resilient individuals. These traditions, learned over centuries, reflected a deep understanding of human physiology, psychology, and social structure. In quiet rooms, amid flickering candlelight and whispered prayers, life unfolded with fragile resilience. Mothers endured, infants thrived, and households adjusted to the delicate rhythms required for survival. Every gesture, every movement, every careful observation contributed to a network of protection and care. Observation, patience, vigilance, and gentle guidance ensured that life, though inherently fragile, could persist. The lessons of medieval childbirth, endurance, attentiveness, and integration of practical and spiritual care, remain enduring examples of human resilience, revealing the profound strength of careful, deliberate, and compassionate action. Life in the medieval period was shaped by rhythms, repetition, and careful observation, and childbirth was no exception. In households across villages, towns, and noble estates, every detail of pregnancy, labor, and early infancy was attended to with meticulous care. Each contraction, each wave of fatigue, each subtle movement of the infant or mother became part of a larger narrative of survival and continuity. The mother's body was both the source of new life and the center of intense physical and emotional experience, while midwives and female relatives acted as guides, teachers, and guardians, shaping the unfolding of life with a combination of skill, intuition, and patient endurance. During pregnancy, women learned to interpret the changes in their bodies. Swelling, aches, fatigue, and sudden cravings were observed, recorded mentally if not in writing, and responded to with herbal remedies, gentle massages, or adjustment of daily routines. These were not mere comforts but vital interventions that affected the health of both mother and child. Daily exercises, often subtle stretches or walks, were incorporated to maintain strength and flexibility. Baths, infusions, and the careful use of herbs were employed to relieve discomfort and prepare the body for labor. Every action, however small, was informed by centuries of accumulated knowledge and practical wisdom, passed down from one generation to the next. Labor was an ordeal of both endurance and timing. The onset of contractions marked the beginning of a journey that could last hours or even days. The mother's focus turned inward, guided by intuition and the rhythmic cues of her body. Midwives observed her closely, feeling for progress, watching for signs of distress, and offering instruction on breathing, posture, and movement. Female relatives provided comfort, holding hands, whispering prayers, or maintaining physical warmth. In this environment, pain was acknowledged but not feared, treated with calm acceptance and deliberate, gentle guidance. Each contraction was a step closer to life, each breath a reinforcement of endurance, each movement a coordination of human skill and instinct. Complications were a constant concern, requiring both practical knowledge and calm intervention. Obstructed labor, malpresentation, and hemorrhage were among the most serious risks. Midwives relied on a combination of experience and observation to assess the situation. Herbal remedies might be applied to stimulate contraction or reduce bleeding, while careful repositioning or gentle manipulation guided the infant into a safer position. Infection, poorly understood but feared, was mitigated through cleanliness, the use of specific herbs, and careful handling of both mother and child. Even in the most skilled hands, stillbirths and maternal death were realities that families confronted with quiet grief, prayer, and ritual acknowledgement. These experiences reinforced the seriousness of childbirth, and the critical importance of skill, attention and endurance. The birth itself was a profound mixture of physical exertion, emotional intensity, and spiritual awareness. The midwife's hands moved with practiced precision, guiding, supporting and intervening as necessary. The mother's focus, honed by the rhythms of labor, guided her through waves of pain, directing breathing and positioning to align with her body's natural processes. Female relatives whispered encouragement and prayers, providing emotional support that was as vital as any physical intervention. The room became a space of concentrated attention, a dynamic interplay of bodies, hands, voices, and instinct. Every gesture had meaning, every sound, every breath, every movement was observed, interpreted, and responded to in real time. Once the child emerged, attention shifted instantly to survival. The infant was cleaned, swaddled, and examined, while the mother began the slow process of recovery. Breastfeeding was initiated, often guided by the midwife to ensure proper latch, effective feeding, and the infant's warmth and security. Swaddling, performed with care, provided comfort and stability, ensuring that the newborn's body temperature remained regulated, and that limbs were supported without restriction. Even the smallest details, how a blanket was folded, how the infant was positioned, the gentle rhythm of rocking, had life or death significance. In some households, wet nurses were employed, selected for their health and experience, but the mother's role remained central, as she provided nourishment, warmth, and security essential for survival. The postpartum period was a time of gradual recovery, intense vigilance, and structured routine. Mothers faced lingering pain, cramping and exhaustion, while maintaining constant attention to their infant's needs. Herbal remedies, gentle massage, and regulated rest were critical for physical recovery. Feeding, swaddling, monitoring, and soothing became a continuous cycle, repeated hour by hour, day by day. Each act reinforced survival, nurtured growth, and strengthened the bond between mother and child. The household adapted to these rhythms, redistributing labor, maintaining warmth, and ensuring that both mother and infant were protected, nourished, and supported. Knowledge of these routines, carefully passed from midwives to mothers and younger women in the household, ensured the continuity of safe and effective care. Community involvement was a vital aspect of medieval childbirth. Neighbors, relatives, and friends provided assistance, meals and emotional support, reinforcing social bonds and shared responsibility. These contributions were not merely practical. They created a network of vigilance and care that enhanced the likelihood of survival. In noble households, attendants, midwives, and advisors monitored the mother and infant closely, ensuring that standards of care were maintained to support dynastic continuity. Across all social strata, the principles of observation, patience, endurance, and practical skill remained consistent, demonstrating that human life could be safeguarded through attention, preparation, and communal effort. Daily life during the months following birth involved a delicate balance of vigilance and care. Feeding schedules were maintained, swaddling was repeated, and every change in behavior, cry, or bodily sign was observed. Bathing and gentle massage aided circulation and comfort, while careful attention to warmth, cleanliness, and nutrition ensured that both mother and infant remained healthy. Midwives continued to supervise, instruct, and intervene as necessary, guiding less experienced caregivers in techniques that had been refined over generations. Knowledge of infant behavior, subtle bodily cues, and methods of comfort were carefully transmitted, ensuring that survival practices persisted across time and space. Rituals and spiritual practices complemented these practical measures. Baptism, blessings, prayers, and charms were integrated into the daily routines of care, reinforcing protection and emotional reassurance. Candles burned softly, herbs infused the air with calming scents, and rituals created a sense of structure and sacredness around the fragile beginnings of life. Even in modest households, these practices offered comfort, reinforced cultural continuity, and provided an additional layer of protection for mother and child. Spiritual care and practical observation existed side by side, each reinforcing the other in the complex tapestry of medieval survival practices. Over time, infants stabilized, mothers regained strength, and households adapted to new rhythms of life. Feeding, bathing, swaddling, and monitoring became habitual, forming a structured system of care that protected fragile life and supported healthy development. Midwives continued to guide, adapting techniques to the changing needs of mother and child. These patterns of observation, patience, and careful intervention created continuity, embedding knowledge into family and community practices. The repetition of these routines strengthened both physical health and social bonds, ensuring that lessons of endurance and vigilance were passed on to subsequent generations. Even as children grew, the principles of attentive care remained central. Observation continued to guide feeding, monitoring of sleep, and assessment of physical and emotional well-being. Illnesses were treated with herbal remedies, warmth, and careful attention. Mothers and caregivers were trained to recognize subtle signs of distress and respond promptly. These practices reinforced resilience, continuity, and survival, forming the foundation for healthy development. Knowledge of these methods was transmitted intergenerationally, embedding the principles of attentive care, endurance, and practical skill into the social fabric of medieval communities. The physical and emotional endurance required of mothers was immense. Labor and recovery demanded strength, patience, and careful attention, while ongoing childcare required vigilance, adaptability, and emotional resilience. Households, as complex systems of support, adapted continually, balancing domestic labor, childcare, and spiritual practice. Every gesture from swaddling to feeding, every adjustment, every monitoring action, carried significance for survival. These practices created patterns that ensured both immediate and long-term well-being, embedding survival strategies into the everyday rhythms of life. Even in the most elite households, where childbirth had political and social implications, the principles of patient observation, careful intervention, and spiritual support remained unchanged. Ceremonial practices were layered on top of practical care, enhancing protection and reinforcing social hierarchies. Across social classes, these shared principles, vigilance, careful attention, and integration of ritual, shaped the outcomes of childbirth, demonstrating the universality of human skill, knowledge and resilience. The enduring lessons of medieval childbirth are evident in every careful observation, every repeated gesture, and every intergenerational transmission of knowledge. Mothers, midwives, and families practiced endurance, vigilance, and attentive care as inseparable elements of survival. Each contraction, each cry, each small act of monitoring or soothing contributed to the intricate, fragile, and profoundly resilient tapestry of human life. Even in the absence of modern medicine, life thrived, nurtured by observation, skill, spiritual attention, and the enduring commitment of those who guided new life into the world. The weeks and months following childbirth were a period of intense care, observation, and adaptation. A time when the fragile balance of survival was constantly maintained through vigilance, patience, and skill. The mother, recovering from the physical demands of labor, faced ongoing fatigue, cramping, and the slow return of strength, while simultaneously attending to the continuous needs of her newborn. Every cry, every movement, every subtle shift in color or breathing pattern became a signal, interpreted carefully by midwives, mothers, sisters, and female relatives who formed a web of guidance, support, and observation around both mother and infant. The room itself became a carefully structured environment, with warmth maintained through fires and blankets, air currents managed to prevent chills, and surfaces cleaned with herbs and cloths, all contributing to an atmosphere of safety and attentiveness. Breastfeeding remained central to survival. Mothers were guided to feed their infants on demand, observing for cues of hunger, discomfort, or lethargy. Proper positioning was taught, ensuring effective latching and the prevention of issues such as engorgement or infection. Wet nurses were employed in some households, selected with great care for health, temperament, and lactation reliability. Even then, midwives supervised interactions, ensuring that feeding was consistent, nurturing, and safe. The infant's physical needs were inseparable from emotional comfort. Gentle rocking, swaddling, and the rhythmic warmth of human touch were critical in reinforcing security and stability. These practices, rooted in centuries of experience, reflected a sophisticated understanding of human physiology, behavior, and the delicate art of survival. Swaddling, seemingly simple, was a highly refined practice. Blankets were folded in specific ways to provide warmth, security, and support, without restricting movement or circulation. Techniques were transmitted from midwives to mothers, emphasizing attention to detail, tactile sensitivity, and repeated careful observation. Swaddling was not merely functional, it carried symbolic significance, reinforcing protection, care, and continuity of tradition. As the infant adjusted to the outside world, these repeated acts of careful handling created patterns of security and stability, shaping early physiological development and emotional regulation. Household routines adapted to the rhythms of mother and child. Tasks such as food preparation, laundry, and tending to livestock were redistributed to ensure the mother could rest and focus on recovery and childcare. Family members, neighbors, and community members often participated, offering meals, monitoring infant health, and assisting with physical tasks. This communal participation reinforced social bonds, collective responsibility, and a network of care that enhanced survival. In noble households, attendants, midwives, and advisors ensured strict attention to all details, integrating ceremonial and practical care to safeguard both mother and child. Across all social classes, the underlying principles remained consistent. Observation, endurance, patience, and meticulous attention to detail were central to survival. Daily life revolved around repeated cycles of care. Feeding, swaddling, washing, and gentle interaction were performed continuously, hour by hour, day by day. The infant's physical signs, crying, movement, breathing, and color, were monitored meticulously, interpreted for signals of need or illness. Midwives provided instruction, ensuring that mothers and caregivers understood both the practical and subtle aspects of attentive care. These repeated patterns formed a rhythm, embedding survival skills into daily life and passing knowledge intergenerationally. The repetition of attentive gestures, careful observation, and gentle intervention reinforced the principles of vigilance, patience, and endurance as central components of early human survival. Spiritual care remained deeply intertwined with practical measures. Prayers, blessings, charms, and rituals were integrated into daily routines, providing comfort, protection, and emotional resilience. Candles burned gently, herbs infused the air, and small ceremonial gestures were woven seamlessly into the practical rhythm of feeding, swaddling, and monitoring. These practices created a multi-layered environment, where physical care was reinforced by spiritual and emotional support. Even in modest households, the combination of attentive care and ritual created a protective framework that enhanced survival, demonstrating the interplay of belief, habit, and skill in early life. As weeks turned into months, the infant's development became increasingly apparent. Milestones such as lifting the head, responding to voices, and the emergence of reflexive movements were observed with keen attention. Mothers and caregivers adjusted feeding, swaddling, and interaction to support growth and health. Gentle massage and controlled movement exercises were applied to strengthen muscles and joints, while warmth, touch, and repetitive interaction reinforced neurological development and emotional security. Observation extended to minute details: the tone of the infant's cry, the coordination of limb movement, the subtle expressions of discomfort or satisfaction, all signals requiring response and adjustment. The mother's recovery continued in parallel, guided by nutrition, rest, and herbal remedies. Physical strength returned gradually, yet the demands of caregiving persisted. Emotional resilience, nurtured by social support and spiritual practice, was equally essential. Midwives provided guidance in maintaining physical health, preventing complications, and reinforcing practices that had proven effective over generations. Household members, attuned to subtle cues, assisted in maintaining the delicate balance required for both mother and infant to thrive. This continuous cycle of observation, intervention, and gentle care created a foundation for survival, embedding knowledge and resilience into the very fabric of daily life. Community networks extended beyond the immediate household. Relatives, neighbors, and local midwives maintained vigilance, offering assistance, instruction, and emotional support. The collective knowledge of generations informed these practices, ensuring that survival strategies were reinforced, refined, and transmitted. Social cohesion, empathy, and shared responsibility were central. Life was preserved not only through individual skill, but through community collaboration, ritual, and attentive care. In this context, survival became a communal achievement, shaped by observation, endurance, and the repeated, deliberate acts of care performed by multiple hands over time. Rituals and ceremonies continue to play a significant role. Baptisms, blessings, prayers, and offerings were performed not only to invoke protection, but to mark the milestones of early life. These ceremonies reinforced cultural continuity, emotional stability, and spiritual security, integrating practical care with symbolic meaning. The simultaneous attention to the physical and spiritual dimensions of life demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of human experience, reflecting centuries of accumulated knowledge and observation. Spiritual practice was not ancillary. It was an integral component of a holistic system designed to ensure survival and well-being. Months progressed into the first year of life, and the infant's growth became more pronounced. Feeding schedules adapted to changing nutritional needs, while careful observation continued to guide care. Minor illnesses, teething, and developmental challenges were addressed with herbal remedies, gentle attention, and vigilant monitoring. Each act of care, feeding, swaddling, soothing, observing, was part of a larger continuum, creating stability, reinforcing health, and establishing habits of attentiveness. Midwives remained key advisors, instructing mothers and household members in nuanced techniques and ensuring the continuity of knowledge. The interplay of practical, emotional, and spiritual attention remained central to survival and thriving. Even as the infant gained strength, the principles of vigilance, observation, and endurance persisted. The household maintained structured routines, balancing care with recovery, domestic work, and social responsibilities. Every gesture, sound, and subtle shift in behavior was interpreted carefully, informing adjustments in care. The mother's endurance, the infant's adaptability, and the household's attentiveness created a delicate equilibrium that allowed life to persist despite vulnerability. Through repetition and careful observation, these practices became habits embedded into daily routines and transmitted across generations. By the end of the first year, both mother and child had traversed a landscape of challenge, endurance, and careful observation. The infant had grown, developed, and stabilized, while the mother had regained strength and confidence. Yet the principles that guided their survival, attention, patience, endurance, and ritual, remained foundational. Life was shaped not merely by biological processes but by the deliberate, continuous, and attentive care of mothers, midwives, and communities. Each act, no matter how small, contributed to a larger pattern of survival, resilience, and continuity, demonstrating the profound impact of observation, skill, and enduring human commitment. Across centuries and social contexts, these practices illustrate the universality of human approaches to survival. In rural cottages and noble estates alike, life was safeguarded through careful attention, patient endurance, and repeated acts of observation and intervention. Knowledge was accumulated, transmitted, and refined across generations, creating a living legacy of care, resilience, and skill. The story of medieval childbirth, though distant in time, provides timeless lessons about the interplay of physical endurance, emotional support, practical knowledge, and spiritual awareness, highlighting the capacity of humans to sustain life through attentive care and deliberate, repeated action. As time progressed, the infant grew stronger, gaining weight, coordination, and awareness of the surrounding world. Each milestone, lifting the head, rolling, grasping, reaching, responding to voices and gestures, was observed carefully by the mother and midwives. These developments were not only physical but emotional and social. Every interaction, every soothing touch, every verbal encouragement contributed to the child's sense of security, attachment, and early social learning. Mothers learned to read subtle cues, tiny facial expressions, variations in cry, shifts in posture, to respond effectively, ensuring the infant's needs were met and survival was supported. This continuous observation and adaptive response formed the backbone of early human development, long before modern science could explain the intricacies of infant behavior. Feeding remained central to survival. As the infant grew, mothers adjusted techniques, feeding more frequently or changing positioning to encourage proper nutrition. Wet nurses were sometimes used when the mother was ill, overworked, or otherwise unavailable. Yet the guidance of midwives ensured that the infant's nutritional needs were consistently met. Care extended beyond the act of feeding. Swaddling, maintaining warmth, and comforting through touch were all integral, providing physiological stability and emotional reassurance. Each act, repetitive yet attentive, built patterns that reinforced survival, growth, and emotional resilience. Knowledge accumulated through generations guided every movement, decision, and intervention, creating a system of care both practical and intuitive. The mother's recovery continued in parallel with her child's development. Weeks of rest, herbal remedies, massage, and regulated activity gradually restored physical strength. Emotional recovery, guided by social support, prayer, and ritual, paralleled the physical process. Fatigue, lingering pain, and hormonal shifts were balanced with attentive care, support from relatives, and the gentle guidance of midwives. The daily rhythm, feeding, monitoring, bathing, swaddling, resting, established a structured environment in which both mother and infant could thrive. The repetition of these patterns reinforced endurance, patience and observation, embedding the principles of survival into daily life. Community support was an ongoing feature of medieval life. Relatives, neighbors, and local midwives participated in the care of mother and child, offering meals, assisting with chores, and providing both practical and emotional guidance. This network of support was critical, ensuring that survival did not rest solely on the mother's endurance. Social bonds were reinforced through acts of assistance, shared observation, and collective responsibility, creating a web of protection around lives of mother and child. In noble households, structured attendants, experienced midwives, and advisors provided meticulous care, balancing ceremonial practices with the practical demands of survival. Across all social levels, the principles remained consistent: vigilance, patience, and the deliberate, repeated application of knowledge ensured survival. Daily life remained centered on attentive observation. Every cry, movement, and expression was noted, interpreted, and addressed. Midwives continued to instruct mothers, ensuring proper techniques of feeding, swaddling, massage, and monitoring. Attention to warmth, cleanliness, and nutrition remained constant, forming a rhythm of care that balanced vigilance with endurance. Through these repeated actions, knowledge was transmitted and refined, creating patterns that reinforced both immediate survival and long-term development. These habits, embedded in everyday life, ensured that both mother and child could flourish despite the inherent fragility of early human life. Spiritual practice and ritual continued alongside practical care. Prayers, blessings, charms, and small ceremonies were integrated into routines, providing reassurance, protection, and cultural continuity. Candles burned softly. Herbs scented the room, and repeated gestures of care were imbued with meaning. Ritual acted as a complement to observation, reinforcing both emotional stability and survival. Even modest households maintained these practices, highlighting the universality of combining practical and spiritual approaches to safeguard life. The interweaving of these elements demonstrated the profound understanding medieval people had of the interplay between body, mind, and spirit. As the infant progressed through the first year, minor illnesses, teething, and developmental challenges required constant vigilance. Herbal remedies, warmth, careful observation, and gentle intervention were employed to support health. Midwives provided ongoing guidance, instructing mothers in techniques to soothe the discomfort, enhance growth, and maintain stability. Each day required attention, repetition, and careful adjustment, emphasizing endurance, patience, and skill. Knowledge of signs, symptoms, and effective responses was passed from one generation to the next, embedding survival practices deeply into community life. The repetition of these acts created a rhythm that guided both mother and child through the uncertainties of early life. Even as the infant grew stronger, the mother remained central to the cycle of care. Feeding, soothing, observing, and nurturing became intertwined with ongoing recovery, household management, and social participation. Every gesture, whether swaddling, adjusting a blanket, interpreting a cry, or providing warmth, contributed to the intricate system of survival and development. Midwives, relatives, and neighbors continue to offer guidance, ensuring that patterns of attentive care were maintained and knowledge was transmitted accurately. These practices reinforced resilience, physical and emotional well-being, and intergenerational continuity. Rituals, ceremonies, and cultural practices continued to play a supportive role. Naming ceremonies, blessings, and prayers integrated spiritual care with practical nurturing, reinforcing emotional security and social continuity. These practices enhanced vigilance and attention, reminding caregivers of the sacred nature of life and their responsibility toward both mother and child. The combination of practical, emotional, and spiritual attention created a holistic framework for survival, one that emphasized both human skill and the wisdom of accumulated tradition. Over the months, the infant's growth, motor skills and emotional responsiveness became increasingly evident. Feeding, swaddling, bathing, gentle massage, and responsive attention reinforced both physical and emotional stability. The mother's strength returned gradually, supported by ongoing herbal remedies, rest, and guidance from midwives. The household adjusted continuously, balancing domestic responsibilities, communal participation, and attentive care of the mother and child. These practices, repeated and refined over generations, ensured the survival and thriving of life in a fragile and uncertain environment. By the end of the first year, both mother and child had endured a complex journey of physical endurance, attentive observation, and delicate care. The infant had grown, developed, and stabilized, while the mother had regained strength and confidence. Yet the principles that guided their survival, patience, endurance, vigilance, spiritual care, and repetitive observation, remained central to daily life. Life in medieval times, though devoid of modern medical intervention, thrived through these practices, demonstrating the profound resilience and adaptability of human beings. Every gesture, every repetition, every act of care contributed to a network of survival that was both practical and deeply human. Across centuries, social strata and cultural contexts, the practices of medieval childbirth demonstrate timeless lessons about attentive care, endurance, and the integration of practical and spiritual approaches. Mothers, midwives, and families preserved life through observation, skill, and patience. Communities supported survival through collective vigilance, guidance, and shared responsibility. Rituals and spiritual practice complemented physical care, providing reassurance and continuity. These practices, transmitted across generations, ensured that life persisted, thrived, and developed, leaving a lasting legacy of human resilience, skill, and compassion. The story of childbirth in medieval times, viewed through this lens, becomes a testament to the endurance, wisdom, and commitment of those who guided life through its most vulnerable stages. Every act of observation, every repeated gesture of care, every integration of spiritual, emotional, and practical supported to the intricate tapestry of human survival. Life, though fragile, was nurtured through patience, knowledge, and continuous attention. The lessons embedded in these practices remain relevant even today, highlighting the timeless importance of endurance, observation, and compassionate care, nurture and nurturing of human life. Through meticulous observation, repetitive care, and patient endurance, medieval mothers and midwives created a system that ensured both immediate survival and long-term development. Feeding, swaddling, warmth, gentle touch, and spiritual attention were harmonized to support the physical, emotional, and social well-being of infants and mothers alike. Communities reinforced these practices, ensuring that knowledge was transmitted accurately, and the principles of attentive care, resilience, and vigilance became embedded in the rhythm of daily life. These lessons, honed through centuries of experience, reveal the extraordinary skill, patience, and humanity that underpinned medieval childbirth. In the quiet glow of candlelight, amidst whispered prayers, careful observation, and the repetition of deliberate gestures, life persisted, strengthened by human resilience and communal care. Mothers endured, infants thrived, and households adapted to the intricate rhythms of survival. Every small action, feeding, swaddling, soothing, observing, formed part of a larger framework of attentive care, embedding survival practices into the very fabric of everyday life. The story of medieval childbirth is thus not merely historical, but a timeless testament to endurance, patience, observation, and the profound power of human care.